There's breaking news on the humanitarian crisis on the border.
There is a growing humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
Crisis at the southern border.
We face a crisis, a real, serious, and sustained crisis at our borders.
Genuine humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
Officials and experts from across the political aisle have claimed a crisis at the southern border. And it was a major campaign issue for President Donald Trump in 2016.
We're going to build a wall, folks. We're going to build it. And you know what else I mean? Mexico is going to pay for the wall.
But strict immigration policies have spanned administrations and parties. Many human rights activists believe one of President Barack Obama's mistakes was failing to overhaul a broken immigration system. Under the Obama administration, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE, arrests were at some of the highest in the country's history. But southern border apprehensions more than doubled in 2019 under the Trump administration due to a combination of increased migration from Central America and strict border enforcement policies. While it's important to touch on the crackdown against illegal immigration, a hallmark of Trump's campaign talking points, legal immigration is under threat, and particularly migrants seeking asylum and refugee status. The COVID-19 pandemic has closed borders around the US, but particularly at the southern border. Under US immigration law, people can come to the United States to seek protection because they have suffered persecution or have reasonable fear in their country. We call these individuals asylum seekers. But the system is under threat. While COVID-19 has devastated the United States, the Trump administration has begun a quiet and calculated approach to deconstruct the legal immigration process to the United States, threatening the values and the people that built this country.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
Let's back up. The US immigration system is quite complex, but I'll let John Oliver put it in more simpler terms.
There are just 4 paths to permanent residency or citizenship. Family, you're related to someone who's already here. Employment, meaning you were offered a job here. Good luck, you won the visa lottery. Or bad luck, you're a refugee or seeking asylum. And the number of people going through each path is by no means equal. Proportionally, they should probably look a lot more like this.
In 1967, the US signed on to the United Nations 1951 Convention and 1967 Protocol. The US, as a signatory, has international legal obligations to provide refugee status to anyone who qualifies. Now, there are 2 different ways to obtain that status, either from abroad as a resettled refugee or in the United States as an asylum seeker. This is where it gets complicated. As an asylum seeker, you may be considered through the affirmative process or the defensive process. Anyone who arrives and presents themselves as an asylee at a border point of entry is normally considered through the defensive asylum process. Anyone who is in removal proceedings, for example pending deportation, and applies for asylum is a defensive asylum seeker, because their claim would, in a sense, defend them from deportation. Anyone who arrives at the border without proper documentation is initiated into some kind of pending deportation process almost immediately. Once a person fleeing persecution has presented themselves at the border, they are in the care of ICE and taken to a detention center where they are first screened to see if they are a security threat. Then, an asylum seeker has to fill out a 12-page form called the I-589 form, only available in English, and present their case to a Department of Homeland Security or DHS asylum officer, who determines if they have what's called credible fear. If they pass that interview, they are then referred for a court date with an immigration judge and released either on parole into the US with an ankle bracelet and no legal work permit, or into ICE detention facilities. It's then up to the asylum seeker to convince an immigration judge that they meet the qualifications for asylum with or without legal counsel present. There is currently no law that mandates the US government provide legal counsel to migrants. Even UACs, or unaccompanied alien children, who arrive at the southern border without any parent or guardian have no right to legal counsel, meaning children as young as 3 have to present their case in front of an immigration judge. Immigration judges look to see if you meet a narrow and subjective criteria for asylum. But immigration judges don't always make independent decisions.
Immigration courts are not nearly as independent as they should be, because while you might assume that they'd be part of the judicial branch, immigration courts are actually part of the executive branch. Specifically, they're run by the D.I.G, making them subject to shifting political priorities.
The majority of migrants presenting themselves at the southern border arrive from the Northern Triangle, most of whom are fleeing gang violence. But gang violence isn't stipulated in U.S. asylum criteria and has been narrowed by the Department of Justice under Attorneys General Jeff Sessions and William Barr. So even after they have passed all these steps, asylum is by no means a guarantee. And at any point through this process, a migrant can be deported in a matter of hours if they fail to meet the standards of each step. Even getting a court date is no guarantee. According to the American Immigration Council, a court date could mean a few months or up to 4 years on parole or in ICE detention with the threat of deportation at any time. And individuals with an immigration court case who are ultimately granted relief, such as asylum, by February 2020 waited more than 930 days on average for that outcome. So now that we understand the process, we can get into the politics. In December of 2018, the United States announced its Migration Protection Protocols, also known as the Remain in Mexico policy.
Now to the confusion at the border over the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy.
Remain in Mexico while their cases are considered.
Son parte del programa que los obliga a permanecer en México.
They cross into the United States seeking asylum. After 3 days in U.S. custody, they were put on a bus and driven into Mexico. It's part of the Trump administration's Migrant Protection Protocols, a policy which now requires migrants like her to remain in Mexico for their asylum cases to be called on.
Effective immediately, individuals arriving in or entering the United States from Mexico illegally or without proper documentation may be returned to Mexico for the duration of their immigration proceedings.
It's part of President Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy. Migrants are forced into shelters set up by NGOs and private organizations that are at full capacity, and dozens of reports, most especially by the International Rescue Committee, found that parents interviewed in shelters at the US-Mexico border reported their children to be at risk of kidnapping, gang recruitment, physical violence, and sexual abuse. The policy has faced intense scrutiny.
CBP was authorized to say, you will not come in. You will stay in Mexico. Migration Protection Protocol is a joke. Who are they trying to protect?
The policy was blocked only temporarily by the Ninth Circuit Court and continues as of the recording of this video. And then there's the second step the administration took: family separation. In June of 2018, reports started to circulate around the country that parents were being separated from their kids once they were placed into ICE custody. And then the country imploded.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We start with outrage here in the United States over immigration, the outcry over the separation of families at the U.S.-Mexico border.
The United States is running concentration camps on our southern border.
Child internment camps, that's what I said.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized.
As we stand here, a 5-year-old woke up in a cage.
Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu just played on the House floor that recording of wailing children who've been taken from their parents at the border. And
what must that sound like?
The gentleman will suspend.
Why are you trying to prevent the American people
Rule
from listening to what it
17
sounds
of
like
the House prohibits.
I support a plan that keeps families together.
We've all seen the pictures of immigrant children ripped apart from their parents at the border. These children are not animals. They are not bargaining chips. They are not leverage to help President Trump build his wall.
I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault.
A federal investigation has launched after NBC obtained these incident reports from this Arizona facility. A 16-year-old boy complaining about water tasting like chlorine. Agents took the mats out of their cell in retaliation.
President Obama separated the children. Those cages that were shown, they were built by President Obama's administration, not by Trump. They're coming like it's a picnic because let's go to Disneyland.
President Obama did not have a family separation policy.
When you officially began family separation in spring 2018, were you aware of research showing it causes trauma that can do both immediate and long-term damage to children's health?
There is no reason why any parent would not know where their child is located. I could, at keystrokes, I sat on the ORR portal with just basic keystrokes within seconds, could find any child in our care for any parent.
Looking through the list of over 500 names, I noticed that there were some very young children there, including a 2-year-old, several 1-year-olds, and one child that was listed as being 0. So I asked to see those children. They left and came back and said that they couldn't find the children. They said to me, well, we called out their name and nobody responded, so we don't know where they are. So I sort of said, well,
these are babies.
They're babies. They're babies. Obviously, they're not going to respond to their name being called. Perhaps you need to locate the adult who is in charge of them, who's taking care of these babies. And they had no answer for me. They just shook their head and said, I don't know.
After months of added pressure, the administration halted its practice of separation in certain cases, followed by a court order ending the practice entirely, sparking outrage over its intended purpose.
Thank you very much. Are you intending for this to play out as it is playing out? Are you intending for parents to be separated from their children? Are you intending to send a message?
I find that offensive. No, because why would I ever create a policy that purposely does that?
Perhaps it's a deterrent.
No, it's the way that it works.
But even after the practice was discontinued, children are still feeling the effects because while DHS had control of the parent, it was the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, that was in charge of housing children. This meant that parents were in some cases deported without their children. Judge Dana Sabra ordered a halt to the practice in 2018 and later issued an order forcing the government to find a way to reunite families with parents who had been deported. However, Judge Sabra refused to issue new guidelines in January of 2020, according to CBS News, stating evidence presented to the court did not support the American Civil Liberties Union's initial lawsuit. Thus, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, means the practice of child separation continues today. It's just that the COVID-19 pandemic has made sure the media storm surrounding the 2018 family separation policies has not been proportional to 2020. According to HHS's own statistics, an average of 997 UACs still remain in detention facilities across the country. While family separation is justified by U.S. law only when a parent or legal guardian poses a threat to the child, HHS's lack of transparency and poor data practices means it's impossible to know if the department is in accordance with the court order or U.S. law. All these measures seem to be in place to provide a deterrent, not just for illegal immigration, but for legal immigration, making it harder for migrants to come in, quote, the right way, as Congressman Nanette Bargan found at the border.
You testified that asylum seekers are not being turned away at the ports of entry. Was that your testimony here today?
They are not turned away. They are brought in. I'm not sure if you're talking about the migrant protection protocol, but in that case,
any asylum seeker who comes to a port of entry, you basically
they are allowed
have
to
just
make
said,
their claim.
Okay, well, let me tell you, Madam Secretary, either you're lying to this committee or you don't know what's happening at the border. And I have been there firsthand and I have seen it twice.
And finally, as the COVID-19 pandemic has forced tighter border restrictions, the Trump administration has begun a quiet yet effective practice of turning away undocumented migrants at the border, according to numerous reports. In March, Acting Secretary of DHS Chad Wolf made the announcement.
As we continue to evaluate common sense measures that reduce risk and prevent further spread, it only makes sense that we have looked at the measures that our neighbors to the north and south are undertaking. And again, as the President said earlier this week, and Secretary Pompeo, we reached an agreement with both Canada and Mexico to limit non-essential travel across our land borders.
What Wolf failed to specify was that DHS could use the Emergency Health Declaration order to turn away thousands of migrants from the southern border, many of whom were underage because of potential health risks they posed to Americans. In April, ProPublica got a hold of Internal Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP, memos that showed the department's Operation Capio, instructing CBP officers to expel migrants to the nearest port of entry without due process. And in June, DHS announced new proposed amendments that would make it next to impossible to grant an individual asylum in the United States. A 161-page document outlines changes such as allowing immigration judges to deny asylum before even seeing the person in a courtroom, changes the definition of torture to make it easier to deny claims, and disqualifies any asylum seeker who may have 2 or more layovers in different countries on their way to the United States. And pending a 30-day comment period and issuance of a final rule, these changes could dramatically change the way we grant asylum for years to come, especially if President Trump is re-elected. And despite countless research that shows that immigrants and communities are correlated with a safer and more prosperous country in the long run, this administration continues to crack down on what it sees as a threat to society. And while there is no doubt that there are individuals looking to cross our borders to wreak havoc, the vast majority of migrants who make the dangerous journey to arrive in the United States are seeking shelter from trauma, pain, and violence that they have left behind. We are a nation of immigrants who have come from all walks of life, but at the very least, those fleeing violence, persecution, and death have a right for their claim to be heard.